right. Okay. Hi, I'm Changmin. Really sorry I can't be there with you, but yeah, got COVID and everything. Yeah, I'm a third year student, PhD student on the program, working with Neil Burgess and Manish Sahani. Well, in general, I work on computational neuroscience, reinforcement learning, and probabilistic methods learning. So yeah, so I'm just gonna start. So I'm presenting this paper, this learning states representations via retracing in reinforcement learning. So this is a recently accepted paper, although it has been proposed for slightly short of a year now. So this is a joint work with Dong Li, Jane Hao, so the collaborators from Huawei. So they offer excellent computational resources, and Dreamland and obviously my supervisor Neil Burgess. So representation learning, essentially we're dealing with representation learning in RL. So why it is important? It's important in modern RL problems because there is so the RL problems we are dealing with is more and more increasingly complex, and they have high-dimensional observations such as images in visual-based control problems like video games, robotics, etc. And the high-dimensional observations, they might contain redundancy and partial observability that requires extraction of the useful information that can be used for actual reinforcement learning. Yes, so one popular approach of representation learning in RL is to use the Jellison models for modeling the transition dynamics of the state space, or at least on the latent space level, hence learning a world model, so-called world model. And this world model, naturally, because it's a latent space, usually it's a latent space model, like a sequential VAE. So it naturally provides a latent representation. So existing approaches of training the world model mainly rely on supervisions based on predictive reconstruction, i.e. it's just like standard, like you embed your latent space, embed your observations into latent space, you do a one-step rollout, and then you decode it and then constrain the, let's say, the L2 distance between the reconstruction, the predicted reconstruction, and the ground truth observations, something like that. In the simplest case, in the deterministic case, that's something like that. So here we propose learning via retracing. So this is a sort of a novel self-supervised method or unsupervised learning method for learning the state representations in reinforcement learning problems. And so by additionally constraining the so-called temporal cycle consistency of the transition dynamics of the state space. So our argument is that existing approaches, or like existing world model approaches, they do not fully exploit the available supervisory signals inherent in the collective trajectory data. So if we define a transition tuple as a S prime to be sort of like a reversible transition when there exists an action A prime, such that the reversed transition tuple S prime A prime S is a valid transition in the class. And we claim that in many tasks, such as spatial navigation or robot arm manipulation, such reversible transitions are very commonly encountered. And training the world model with such additional reverse transitions, they might improve sample efficiency of learning the world model, of learning the overall model, without additional interaction with the environment, whilst also might be providing some additional benefits, such as like we propose that learning from such reverse transitions could potentially lead to stronger generalization and planning horizon, and extended planning horizon, essentially. Just for instance, in this specific figure, we show a specific task where a rat is trying to reach a ghost state in a maze environment, and consider the situation that after the rat has navigated towards the go state, it is able to generate multiple imaginative reverse trajectories that retraces back to its starting location. And basically all such imaginative trajectories, they all cross the two doorways, and which are essential to the success of the navigation task. And so the rat could quickly, given the multiple imaginative reverse simulations, they could quickly learn to identify the key bottleneck states that are essential for the success of the navigation task of the state space. So this might lead to stronger generalization. So now we introduce our methods, the learning via retracing. So we firstly introduce it in this most general format, and then we will later provide a more concrete model-based RL instantiation of the method. So like I said, assuming a transition tuple is reversible, then the representation space, we hope, is trained by constraining the temporal cycle consistency of the reversible transition on the latent space level, i.e. the representations of the original states and the retraced predictive states are constrained to be similar. And hence, in addition to the standard predictive reconstruction using the forward simulation, forward rollouts, forward transitions, we obtain an additional supervisory signal given the pseudo reverse transitions without any additional interaction with the environment. And learning via retracing aims to, or we so call it learning via retracing, should really be representation learning via retracing, aims to optimize the overall world model, which includes both the embedding function and the latent transition dynamics model, which also contains the decoding function, the observation likelihood function. But this is not, at least in this case, this is not addressed by learning via retracing. So the overall objective function is like in equation 1, where E phi are the encoding functions, the AMCs are the transition dynamics model, and the AFTORs, so the AFTORs. So this is the some scheduling functions that regularize that specifies the specific retracing operations that you are using. For instance, in the simplest case, it's just going to be one-step retracing, or it could be a combination of retracing steps and forward rollout steps, things like that. But in the simplest case, it can just be a one-step retracing. So essentially, it just means that given the same transition dynamics model, we doing a one-step predictive rollout, and to get the next state predictive estimate. And then given the forward predictive estimates, we use the same transition dynamics model to do a retracing step using the retraced action, which is learned. And then we to derive to estimate the retraced state. And then we regularize the so-called temporal cycle consistency by constraining the similarity between the retraced states and the ground truth state. So these all happen on the latent space level. So no observation is involved. We propose the so-called cycle consistency world model, or in short CCWM, which is a model-based RL instantiation of learning retracing. We use a so-called recurrent state space model for modeling the world model, which involves the encoding and decoding functions between the observation and the latent space, as well as the latent state transition dynamics model. So basically, our RSSM is a state space model with nonlinear observation and latent transitions, where the latent transitions are modeled by a recurrent network, such as a gated recurrent unit or LSTM, for instance. So the forward transitions, they contribute to model learning via standard predictive reconstruction in the temporally forward fashion. So essentially that means that because we're using a generative model, we are doing this probabilistically. So we are essentially maximizing a sequential version of the variational free energy. And we're doing this because we're using deep neural networks. So this is more of a amortized variational problem. So the reverse action in the retraced transition sample is estimated given the two adjacent states using using a neural network function approximator. And this neural network, this reverse action approximator is trained jointly with the rest of the model, essentially. Instead of there is a multiple design choices. Maybe I didn't mention this, but the general framework of learning variation can be quite general. So there's lots of flexibilities in the design choices, like the model-free, model-based nature of the agents, the whether or not we use the same transition dynamics model for modeling the forward and reverse transition dynamics, whether or not we do offline learning of the reverse action approximation. So lots of design choices here. We just introduce CCWM as one specific choice of such possibilities, and it works. So that's why we stick with it. So yeah, the retraced state estimate is computed using the same transition, as I mentioned, this is computed using the same transition dynamics model as the forward transitions, based on the forward predictive estimates. In this way, we are able to embed the prior belief of the cycle-consistent transition dynamics into the learned world model. So on the right, this is the overall transition dynamics. Sorry, the overall graphical model of the CCWM. So as you can see, this is essentially on the top. This is essentially a sequential VAE, where the state representations are formed by some technicalities that you can find in the paper, but the representations of the latent representations is like a concatenation or combination of the posterior estimates of the predictive distribution and the some embedding features of the observations. At the retrace steps, is essentially it only contains the prior predictive distribution instead of the posterior predictive distributions, for the purpose of extending the planning horizons and prediction horizons, and so it doesn't make any reference to the actual observations, yeah. Apart from the estimating the reverse. Sorry, not only implicitly, partly involves the observations by estimating the reverse actions. So the temporal cycle consistency constraint, we wish to implement the temporally cycle consistent transition dynamics on the latent space level. So this is constrained on the. We hope we could learn a MDP structure on the latent space instead of over the observation space. So so basically we, instead of only using, let's say, the Euclidean distance between the representation vectors between the original and the retraced states, we use a more strict constraint on the temporal cycle consistency constraint, which is the so-called bisimulation metric loss, which is shown in equation 2. So it involves a L1 loss between the representation vectors, and also it constrains the similarity between the states on the MDP level. So the states are similar if, in addition, their respective predicted reward and transition distributions are also close to each other. So there is also a varying level of bisimulation metrics. So it could only involve the KL divergences, so so this is the Wasserstein, the two Wasserstein distances. It could also only involve these distances with respect to the optimal policy, or it could involve the arbitrary policy, or it could involve transition dynamics or not. So it's again a design choice, but it provides a more strict constraint on the MDP level rather than only on so it basically assumes the latent geometry to be to follow a MDP structure instead of just being Euclidean. So the overall objective for training CCWM is a combination of the standard objective based on the predicted reconstruction, i.e. the standard variational free energy, and the retracing loss, the thing we just described here, the bisimulation metric, which regularizes the temporal cycle consistency of the learned world model. So one thing we specifically wish to note is that so perfectly reversible transitions might not always exist. So for instance, in the worker task from the deep learning control suite, as is shown in the figure below, when this bipedal android is falling down, as shown in the right panel, there exists absolutely no valid action that could take the agent back to its previous state on the left, because it's falling down due to gravity. So in this case, naively constraining the cycle consistency given such irreversible transitions could negatively impact the overall representation learning and model learning, obviously. So in order to deal with such irreversibility, we introduced an approach termed as adaptive truncation, which could identify the irreversible transitions based on the value estimates of your downstream RL controller, either being value-based or active critic or something like that. And then we leave them out from training the overall model. But note that we still keep them for training the model using the standard forward predictive reconstruction. So we use a theorem, we propose a theorem in the main paper to justify our proposal of the adaptive truncation. So yeah, it's in Appendix C if you are interested. So in terms of the empirical studies, we evaluate CCWM on a range of challenging visual-based continuous control tasks from the deep learning control suite. So we set I didn't really, I really should, but I sort of assumed that the very basic RL was a common knowledge, so I skipped the slide somehow. But basically, we use a active critic structure for doing the RL learning, which means that it involves both a value estimate and a policy gradient method. And we use generalized advantage estimation for the active critic to improve the essentially to improve the performance, so it reduces the bias of the policy gradient. So we compare CCWM with several baseline agents. Our main baseline is the Dreamer agent, which also trains the Wells model based on a recurrent state space model, but using only the predicted reconstruction in the forward direction. And we also compare CCWM with several model-free agents, such as the soft active critic, D4PG, and A3C. And we only show the asymptotic performance of these model-free agents because, in general, they require more training steps, but achieves better asymptotic performance than model-based methods. So here's the main experimental results. So basically, the green streamer, the blue is ours, and the dotted lines are the model-free baselines. So the main takeaway is that CCWM outperforms the baselines on the majority of the selected 8 tasks, and is only outperformed by Dreamer on one specific task, which is the Hopper stand task. Possibly, we think is possibly due to the strong irreversibility inherent in this specific task, which we will take a look at later. We'll address this using the adaptive truncation method. Right. So in addition to improved sample efficiency and asymptotic performance, we also show that CCWM yields more accurate long-range predictive reconstruction than Dreamer. So essentially, we just tested how, upon training, how accurate or how precise are the predictive rollouts in the observation space, and give you an extended horizon of the prediction. And indeed we confirm that, and we do show that CCWM is more accurate and spans a longer region, a longer range of predictive reconstruction by Dreamer. And so this might lead to stronger ability for planning and also more accurate value estimates and policy gradients, possibly. And as per our motivation from the rat demonstration in the introduction, we also tested CCWM and Dreamer on the zero-shot transfer tasks. So we evaluate trained agents of CCWM and Dreamer directly on the tasks with changed physical properties, such as the friction constants, the thickness of the agent, etc. And just to note that we give Dreamer more training steps because it's less sample efficient than CCWM. So we made sure that both agents have the same asymptotic behavior before running the zero-shot transfer task. So by running the two static t-tests, we show that CCWM has roughly equivalent performance as Dreamer on simpler changes on the task, but use statistically more significant better performance than Dreamer when the changes are more complicated. So we applied our adaptive truncation method to CCWM. We show that the addition of adaptive truncation significantly improves the performance of CCWM on the Hopper stand task, which we provide in the main paper. We also provide graphical demonstration that is that the Hopper stand task is in fact a happily irreversible task in the appendix. So the augmentation of the adaptive truncation. So given the augmentation, CCWM indeed outperforms its original model, and this time outperforming the Dreamer agent. And also we notice that on the less irreversible tasks, such as the Walker task, we do not observe noticeable performance improvement, which also coheres with our intuition. So in conclusion, we introduced learning via retracing. So it's a new self-supervised, unsupervised representation learning method for RL tasks, which could improve the sample efficiency of learning whilst providing a number of additional benefits, such as stronger generalization and the extended planning horizon. Sorry. So one additional thing I wish to briefly point out is the relationship of learning via retracing with the reverse hippocampal replay. So the hippocampal replay is the event of the Lezine trial reactivation of hippocampal neurons during resting, usually found in rodents, but recently found also in humans. So this reactivation can happen in both directions, both the forward and also the reverse directions. And the hippocampal replay has long been thought to play a very critical role in model-based decision-making in both humans and rodents. So recently, a study showed how reverse hippocampal replay are prioritized due to its utility in non-local inference, model-based inference, and learning in humans. And CCWM, or in general learning retracing, can be interpreted as an immediate normative instantiation of the reverse hippocampal replay. And similar to the intuitions from the computational neuroscience literature, we also find that learning via retracing brings a number of benefits, merits compared to its counterparts that only uses the forward rollouts. Yeah. So basically, our experimental, we made some experimental predictions, neuroscience experimental predictions that the representations, the independent systems of the sorry, something I forgot to mention. We hope that learning via retracing can learn the controllable internal states of the agents, even when there exists some external features, such as the location or some irrelevant features to the task are irreversible. And such representations can be combined with the task-specific global contextual, the learned internal representation can be combined with the task-specific global contextual information or representations provided by an independent system that facilitates stronger policy learning. And the independent system, our experimental prediction could be, this independent system could be potentially supported by the hippocampal area, where the reversed hippocampal replay of the allocentric cognitive map hippocampal neurons, such as the play cell, grid cells, hierarchical cells, could in turn drive reverse replay of the egocentric sensory or motoric representations. So future work could look at other potential instantiations of the general framework of learning we're retracing, such as the model-free version of that, for instance. So some acknowledgements, like my courses, obviously, and also Manish Sahani, Peter Dan, Jessica Hamricks for comments and discussions of the paper and the project, etc. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. And this is the link. Cheers.
Okay, any questions? Yeah.
So, Changmin, you mentioned it could be a model-free instantiation, this retracing algorithm. Could you maybe talk a bit like more about how that works?
I can't hear that. Sorry.
So the question was, there was a suggestion there might be a model-free version of this, which you didn't talk about. Could you mention that a bit more?
The model, well, the model-free, so there's a concurrent work that is similar to a model-free version of the general idea of learning via retracing. So it uses a deterministic transition model, but it uses a separate, like completely independent forward and reverse transition dynamics model, such as it's sort of like similar to the ICM module in the curiosity-driven works, RL works. And so it's model-free. It only uses the forward and reverse transition models to acquire a representation, and afterwards it completely discards the learned model and only uses the representation for model-free learning. Instead of, like in our case, we actually do offline diner style offline model-based learning. So so in general, model-free version of this could be more flexible than model-based, because we don't even need to use the learned dynamics model. So yeah, so you can have more design choices too. Yeah.
Well, in my mind, the model-free is less efficient, right?
Definitely.
I'm slightly surprised you say that, but I thought the whole point of model-based was that it's more sample efficient. But,
it is, but it's more well, humans are more model-based rather than model-free. So in that sense, yeah.
one more question. I'll do.
Great talk. So my question is, during your control task that you showed us, what % of time or what % of actions do you think were not reversible?
Oh, you heard that, good.
Oh, I heard that, sorry, thank you. It depends on the task. So we saw it here, that's, on the Hopper stand task, there's a very significant improvement when you include the augmentation of the adaptive truncation, but on the Walker task, you don't see that. So so like I said, we based our adaptive truncation on the continuity of the value estimates. And so we look at the value estimates on the latent representation level. We visualize that, and we saw that on the Hopper stand task, you see very clear clusters of transitions. So within the clusters, the sort of like the spatial altering of the trajectory is rather contingent, but you see very clear gap between these clusters. But on in the Hopper stand task, but in the Walker task, there's much less of that. It's more of a very continuous range structure to it. And so it really depends on task, and we don't have a rather. I would say, I'm afraid we don't have a quantitative measure of the irreversibility of the task. We can only have this rather intuitive. So and we can only derive this through graphical visualization, I would say.
Maybe just one final question from me before we break. So I mean, I guess you could view what you're doing as a kind of maybe a regularizer in some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are basically assuming that maybe the dynamics to some degree is reversible. But I mean, there are other kinds of constraints you could impose, like self-consistency constraints. Like, for example, if you take this action followed by another action, then you should be able to, predict where the system will end up. So I mean, are there other kinds of constraints that, I mean, this reversibility one is like, clearly not always correct.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other kinds of self-consistent constraints that, you could consider which might be, more, or less controversial or more generally applicable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a great question, and also a question pointed out by many of the majority of the reviewers, actually. So I guess the short answer is we can't think of a solution, and nor can the reviewers can. So there's not such very general. There might be some we can probably borrow from some behavioral results from humans or rodents, but I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not entirely sure on that. Yeah.
If I told you you start in state S and you take action A followed by action primed, you ought to be able to know where you will end up without observing intermediate state after following. From state S to go taking action A, you go to state S primed.
Mm-hmm.
Take another action A primed, go to state S primed. You ought to be able to predict self-consistently if you're in state S and you take action A and A primed, you'll end up in state S double primed. That would be, for example, a self-consistency.
Yes, that would be like a yes, in that sense, if we've got a path integration system, so there are multiple, if we've got a path integration system in the model, then it's sort of like it can integrate multiple transitions into one coherent valid transitions, and then we regularize the composition of multiple short transitions. We regularize the equivalence of the composition of multiple short transitions with the one long transitions. Yeah, it might be valid, but it might require a quite accurate path integration system, which could happen. So, but might involve a very heavy and require very specific tuning of some very huge recurrent networks. I think so. Benino, Barry, et al. From DeepMind, they proposed one such system back in 2019, one such model in 2019, and it was quite nice. But it's like I said, we can do that, and it's a good suggestion. Thank you. And but we haven't done that. Yeah, we will consider doing that.
Great. All right, let's thank Changmin again.
Yeah, thank you.